Good evening. My name is Will. Thank you for joining our live interactive Access Live event. We host these events to give Congresswoman Pingree the chance to speak directly with you wherever you are and reach as many of you to answer as many questions as possible. This evening, we'll be discussing the actions taken by the Trump administration and how Congresswoman Pingree is fighting for the people of Maine. As I mentioned, this is an interactive forum, and we would love to hear from you. We'll be taking as many questions from participants as we possibly can live on tonight's event. If you have a question, you can press *3 on your phone keypad at any time, and you'll be placed in line to speak with a member of our staff, and they'll take down your name and question. The next time you hear your name, you'll be live on the call, and you'll be able to ask your question directly. If you're streaming the event on our website, you can simply type your name and question below the streaming player. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we possibly can this evening. We receive a lot of questions on our live events, so if we're not able to address your question tonight, please leave a voicemail after the event or send an email to rep.shelley.pingree@mail.house.gov. That's rep.shelley.pingree@mail.house.gov. Rep. Shelley.Pingree@mail.house.gov. Again, if you have any questions throughout the event tonight, please press *3 on your keypad or type them below the streaming player. You may also sign up for our newsletter by pressing *6 at any time during the call, and an operator will take down your email address. Again, please press *3 to ask a question or *6 to subscribe to our e-newsletter. And now, I turn it over to Congresswoman Pingree.
Thank you very much for opening our call, and thank you to so many of you who have joined tonight. I know you all have very busy lives, so I appreciate very much that you're taking time to have this conversation with me. And thank you to so many of you who have been calling or emailing our office or doing a whole variety of things related to the very challenging times that we are dealing with. I know these are challenging times. I know people are frustrated, angry, confused, and feeling a lot of emotions about everything that's going on, sometimes faster than you can keep track of. And I want to have as long of a conversation as we possibly can tonight about the questions that you have or the suggestions. I don't know how to begin. We're dealing with unprecedented times. You know, we prepared for a lot when an election changes and you have a new president. You know there will be transitions. You know there will be policies that you don't agree with. But I don't think any of us anticipated that we would have a president that didn't show respect for the Constitution, that took illegal actions, that formed an organization called DOGE, where an unelected billionaire could shut down whole departments or lock the doors of agencies, put employees on administrative leave, stop access to payments, perhaps access classified or personal information. So many things we've never seen, unprecedented actions in government, and I want you to know we are working as fast as we possibly can to deal with each and every one. You know, we're talking about a lot of cuts to government agencies, and I understand many people like seeing us cutting government funds, and that's our job on the Appropriations Committee, to look for areas where we can cut and to do it in a way that's sensible and achieves a bipartisan agreement on that. We all worry about a budget deficit. We all worry about the importance of keeping government funding. But none of us could have predicted the hiring freezes that we've been seeing, the shutdown at USAID. We weren't expecting, and I don't think most of my constituents were expecting, that these cuts would impact farmers in the state of Maine who are just trying to make ends meet, or seeing things like $300 million worth of food stuck at ports that should be sent to starving kids around the world. These are all things we didn't anticipate, and now we're trying to fight back. I get asked every day, you know, what are you guys doing about it? And I'm happy to talk about that during the call. You know, it's complicated in government. There are some things we can and can't do, and we're very grateful for the actions of the courts right now, who are taking the lead, 55 lawsuits out there, and fighting back on so many illegal activities. Because the Democrats aren't in power in the House, we don't have all the same advantages that we did when we were in the majority. We've been introducing legislation on every possible affront to government right now, and we are going to continue to introduce that legislation. But it's the power of the Speaker of the House that holds a hearing on that legislation or brings it to the floor for a vote. We can have hearings and ask questions. We can work cooperatively with whistleblowers to gather up all the information that we can, and we can work with our allies in the Attorney General's offices, in organizations around the country on filing these lawsuits, and as I said, we have 55 of them growing. People ask me, what can they do? And we're going to talk a lot about that on the call tonight. But thank you so much for being on the call, for educating yourself about what's going on every day in our government, for having conversations with your friends, maybe even friends who don't agree with you on everything that's going on, but an opportunity to talk about some of those things. And you can reach out. You know, the president has gone after some of the most vulnerable in our states, the new Mainers, the immigrants, the LGBTQ community, educators, people in foreign countries that don't have sufficient food to eat. You can do everything you can to help those, to ask people how they're doing. We'll talk more about where some of those cuts are tonight, but as I said, some of our farmers are being cut in vital funds. So maybe stop into your local CSA or farmers market and do a little shopping this week or ask them how they're doing. Look at some of the other groups that are being cut, and you'll hear more about those as time goes on and see if there are ways that you can help. But let's get right to the conversation and to the calls. If you have a question, press *3 on your keypad at any time to get in the queue to ask a question. One of our staff will collect those questions, and we'll answer as many as we can in this event. So let's go ahead, operator, let's take your question, and we'll start with the first one.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We'll start off with an online question from Chris. Chris asks, how is Congress going to rein in DOGE and executive branch overreach?
Yeah, very good question. As I said, people are very distressed about Elon Musk and a group of, unelected, unappointed, usually non-civil service employees who are going through budgets and collecting data that we think they're not eligible to do. We have multiple lawsuits going on some of the spending freezes. We have lawsuits going on trying to stop his access at this point in time. And you've seen many of my colleagues just out there in front of agencies banging on the doors, trying to make a public show of the fact that we do not agree with what's going on. We're submitting legislation to say that no agency should ever be closed to a member of Congress. And as we start the appropriations process, we will continue to investigate and do all we can to make sure that we're stopping illegal cuts, that we're bringing some sensibility to the process, and to attempt to rein in what's going on. Next question.
Great, thank you. As a reminder, if you have a question for the Congresswoman, you could press *3 at any time on your keypad to get in the queue to ask a question live. You can also press *6 at any time, and an operator will take down your email address so you can join the Congresswoman's e-newsletter. We now move on to a question that is called in. This question comes from Doug from Plymouth.
Oh, hi.
Doug,
can you
go
hear?
ahead with your question. You're live with the Congresswoman.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Loud and clear, Doug. Go ahead with your question.
Thanks so much for having this town meeting, Congresswoman. I'm just wondering if there's any effort afoot on you or more than just one Democratic congressperson to engage with Republican congresspeople, whether it's behind the scenes or in front of the scenes. I keep hearing reports that they're disturbed, but they're not owning up to it. Can dialogues like that happen, or are they too afraid to have them? Thank you.
Thanks. That's a really good question. Thank you for calling in. And I think it's important to discuss. As I said, the Democrats are in the minority in the House right now. Well, we have a very slim margin, so when it comes to voting, we'll have some real opportunities, but when it comes to controlling the activities in the House, we don't have as much sway. But it is important for people to make phone calls to Republicans, to let them know how they feel, to make sure that your voice is being heard. They're getting as many calls to their offices as we are, so I know that people are active and engaged, and that's very important. They have the ability to put legislation forward to stop what's going on. They could change this very quickly. But you're right, it does seem like many of them are not speaking up in areas where we fully believe that they should be. I was on the floor voting today, and I made a point to go to two of the Republicans who I work frequently with, one on agricultural issues, and as I said, a lot of the funding from the USDA is currently being blocked. I asked them if they're working to get that funding opened up as soon as possible, because I know that's just as important to the farmers in their district and farmers around the country. Now, I just want you to know, he said to me, I believe it will be open soon, and I said, I have a lot more concerns about that, but I'm going to keep nagging you about it. But again, that's just a small example of an important conversation. I'm also the ranking member on the Interior and Environment Subcommittee of Appropriations. So on appropriations, we have a lot of power over what gets funded and not gets funded, and I have a very close relationship with my Republican colleague who is the chair of that committee. I went over to talk to him. As you may have seen, there's been a sort of bizarre takeover of the Kennedy Center, and we fund the arts agencies through our funding stream, and I asked him if we could hold a hearing or put something together quickly just to make sure that that isn't sort of dismantled in front of our eyes. There's a lot of things that we're worried about, and that's just one of many, along with the NEA and the NEH and all of the funding for the arts. He agreed with me that this was something they were looking into, and I will follow up with him tomorrow. So I just give you those 2 points of contact to let you know we are absolutely talking to everybody as much as we can. We're worried. Our committee also controls the funding for the national parks. Some of the shutdown in hiring, the hiring freezes are impacting seasonal hires at our national parks. Acadia National Park, as you know, is an important part of the Maine economy, and I'm putting together a list of all of my colleagues who have national parks in their districts. So while the funding comes through my committee, and this should normally be controlled by us, it's currently out of our hands. And so another example of, just a way, person to person, that I'm talking to everybody with a national park to say, hey, you're going to be impacted by seasonal hires too. We can't let DOGE and these crazy processes put a stop on things. Again, just as an aside, I understand the value of analyzing every bit of government funding. I understand the value of looking for waste when you have it. But there are some areas we know we're going to fund that we know they're vital to the economies of many of our communities, and we can't let this process that's done by an unelected billionaire stop the functioning of government. So, again, thank you for your question. This is the responsibility of the Republicans. I can't speak for them, but I can continue to nag them and push them and make sure that, we do whatever we can. Next question.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Our next question comes from Joyce from Wyndham. Joyce, you're live with the Congresswoman. Go ahead with your question.
Congresswoman, thank you. This is not a question. It's not a frustration. My younger sister and her husband, they both work for USAID. Their kids are in college. All of a sudden, they are unemployed. My sister right now, she's stuck in Ghana. The government is saying if you want to come back home, you pay your way home. That is a frustration. My other frustration is the DEI. There is that erroneous belief that blacks are uneducated. I'm a black woman. I'm highly educated. My children are highly educated. My siblings are highly educated. I'm the least educated of them all with a master's degree. They all have PhDs. How do we change the perception? And I'm just worried that people are going to be committing suicide when they cannot afford to make ends meet any longer. So it's not a question, it's just my frustration.
Thank you very much for your question and for your call. And thank you for the important points that you're making. First off, thank you to your family members for the work that they're doing with USAID. I am so sorry for this dramatic, really catastrophic process that's been going on with USAID. I do believe this process is illegal. We've had a few court actions that say that all the employees can't be laid off, but for many of the people who work for USAID as contractors, who work for nonprofit organizations around the world, as you said, some of them have been shut off overnight. I'm shocked that they have to pay their way home, but that's often how they're being treated. And this is incredible mistreatment of people who have given, many years, their brilliance, their hard work, really to our country, and often on incredibly important missions. I mean, USDA has a whole variety of purposes. People often talk about it as soft power, as a critically important resource that enhances our diplomatic relations, particularly in troubled areas around the world. We've heard military generals say, if you don't put money into USAID, you're going to have to buy me more bullets, and that's really the basic concept that all of us hear about throughout the years. It's also an important international health organization. Remember when we had the Ebola scare? It's organizations like USAID that helped to stop the spread of life-threatening diseases like Ebola, HIV/AIDS, polio, so many things in a time when we are, just recovering from the last pandemic. We know what an international health crisis is. So not doing that important work is vital. Also helping starving children and starving communities around the world. As I mentioned earlier, we have millions of dollars loaded onto ships that can't move that is meant for famine-riddled areas. These are the very places in the world where not only are people starving or in huge crisis, but often where the migration comes from and where people are forced to move because of years of drought, of war-torn areas. So while there, again, may be some argument that there is money that we shouldn't be spending or every agency should be reviewed, the way that this administration has gone about doing it and the way that this administration has sort of characterized everybody as corrupt or fraudulent or not doing important work is really unthinkable, un-American, unpatriotic, and as I said, illegal. So I appreciate the work that your family members are doing. I'm sorry. Like I said, we are trying to get as many court orders to put it back together again, but they're in there using a wrecking ball and not doing things in a way that would be sensible or continue the operations. You also mentioned DEI, and DEI has been used as this broad brush to fire employees, to stop funding. Once again, it's just being used as sort of a cudgel, not really talking about the importance of many of the programs that are done under this term. This is diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's making sure that all populations are included, that all people are given a chance at employment. We've seen all kinds of examples of where this has been done inappropriately, and we are trying to stop that as well. But I thank you for your call, and I'm happy to take the next question.
Great, thank you. As a reminder, if you have any questions throughout tonight's event, please press *3 on your phone keypad or type them below the streaming player. If you're interested in the Congresswoman's e-newsletter, you could press *6 at any time to sign up. We'll move to our next question. Our next question comes from Rod in Walterboro. Rod, you're live with the Congresswoman. Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you very much. The question I have has to do with Trump's behavior, and that is, what's the muscle behind when court orders are not followed, they're defied? When he enacts funding to pay off these people for 8 months, but he's not the one in control of the purse strings, the House is supposed to be. And it doesn't seem like there's any mechanism to stop him from doing these things that are, in some cases, against the Constitution and outside of his powers.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really important question. I certainly appreciate your call. The reason we have been calling this activity illegal or unconstitutional isn't just to use a bunch of political rhetoric. It's not to inflame people. It's not to try to create more anxiety in this situation. It's because many of us are deeply concerned about the very fundamentals of our democracy. It's totally clear in the Constitution that Congress holds the, as we call it, power of the purse. So when the president makes unilateral decisions about firing employees or defunding organizations or stopping the funding that's already been contracted and approved through Congress and through the executive branch, we see it as an illegal activity. We see it as going against the Constitution. As I mentioned, there are 55 lawsuits, probably more by the time we've gotten on this call, from all kinds of different organizations, nonprofit groups, attorneys generals from states like Maine, labor unions, impacted individuals, groups of employees. There's just a tremendous number of them out there. And for the most part, they are winning in the court. These executive orders written by Donald Trump are not very well crafted in legal terms, so they're not standing up in court. They give us the feeling like he just wanted to throw a lot of them out there and keep them going in all directions, but didn't expect to win many of them. That said, he's ignoring some of the court actions. And we've been collecting information every single day, all of us in Congress, to let the courts know when he's not following through. There will be, people are going back into court. There will be potential of contempt of court proceedings that go on. Many of these will be appealed, and as you can imagine, many of them go up to the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court has made some interesting decisions, and we don't have total confidence that they'll rein in the executive branch in all the ways that we think, but we also think that Justice Roberts and others have showed some concern about Trump's inaction on these things, and that we might get some relief at the Supreme Court. Donald Trump keeps telling people, I'm going to follow the courts, I'm going to follow the courts. His actions have said otherwise. But I want you to know we're on this every single day. We're collecting information, and if any of you want to get in touch with our office because you work with some funding stream that's not getting through on the portals or some federal money that you're not getting, that's important for us to know because we're paying attention to each one, and my colleagues and I are all busily working to fight back.
Great, thank you.
Thank
we'll
you.
move to our next caller. Next, we have Keith from Casco. Keith, you're live with the Congresswoman. Go ahead with your question.
Thank you. I've been looking at the CBO proposals to cut veterans' benefits, and it seems to me that they want to cut veterans' benefits at retirement age as much as 30% because we've been going on Social Security. That would be, where do we go with that?
Thank you for your question. Thank you for your service. We have long regarded veterans benefits as how we make sure and reward and thank those people who have served their country, and would very strongly oppose any cuts to veterans benefits or loss of benefits. But you bring up an important point. Prior to Doge beginning in operation and Elon Musk and Donald Trump going down this pathway, we were told that Doge would find $2 trillion in cuts. And I just want to put that into perspective for people a little bit. The annual appropriations budget that I work on every year is about $1.7 trillion. So that's how much money we spend in government every year. So if you're going to find $2 trillion of cuts, and I should say, the $1.7 trillion is exclusive of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. That gets you up closer to about $6.5 trillion. So if you want to find $2 trillion in cuts, you can't do it without going after some of our most vital services. That would be Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, which is how we provide health care for our poorest citizens and our seniors in nursing homes, and very likely big areas like veterans benefits. Now, my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will tell you that they'll fight for and stand behind veterans benefits every day of the week. But I have seen otherwise. I have seen them attempt to cut programs. I have seen how long it's taken them to increase the funding in areas where we need it. And I've often seen proposals to privatize veteran services in ways that might provide less services or make them less accessible to veterans. So I am deeply worried about this. I'm deeply worried that the hiring freezes right now are preventing people from joining the VA who work in the medical profession. And if anyone's tried to access veteran services, they know that one of the biggest challenges we've faced over the years is not enough doctors and nurses to perform the services. So a hiring freeze is very detrimental to our ability to deliver those services right now. Again, we're trying to fight back on all fronts, and I can guarantee you when we're in the appropriations process this year, we will fight to make sure that no veterans' benefits are cut. But I appreciate the worry on the part of the caller and so many others who depend on that for their health care or for their, their daily support.
Thank you. As a reminder, we want to answer as many questions as possible. So if you do have a question, we invite you to press *3 at any time to join the queue. We'll move to our next question. Our next question comes from Linda, who calls from Wells. Linda, you are live with the Congresswoman. Please go ahead with your question.
Hi. Thank you so much for your service for the people of Maine, Shelley. We really appreciate it. I'm wondering how we can stop the current president's focus on real estate deals, which are disrupting long-established national boundaries.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. Thanks for your kind remarks. What an unprecedented time. This is a president who doesn't seem to have a basic grasp of diplomacy, at least in the way we've generally understood it, and has already made some very inflammatory statements. I assume when you're talking about real estate deals, you're talking about the president saying he plans to buy Greenland or would like to take over Panama, who thinks we should have, a resort in Gaza after we move out all of the Palestinians who consider it home, or we should make Canada the 51st state. In none of these instances would he find sufficient support in Congress. I don't think any of them are even vaguely realistic, although when the president gets asked about them, he usually doubles down. My observation has been that in most cases, it just creates ill will in other countries around the world. He claims to do it for a negotiating opportunity or a diplomatic opportunity. I don't think those have been very successful either. The Middle East is a good point. Ever since he made his inflammatory remarks about Gaza, the reaction has been to stop the flow of hostages, and now another proposal to stop the ceasefire this weekend. So that does not seem to be soothing over or helping our diplomatic efforts there for the much-needed ceasefire and rebuilding of the devastation in the Gaza Strip. So these just are so misguided and mishandled. I understand his interest in Greenland. It's a vital nation, and there's a lot of important resources there. And we should be deeply, deeply concerned about what is going on in the Arctic with the polar ice cap melting and its impact on climate change. But Greenland belongs to the Greenlanders, and they have a strong relationship with Denmark, and I don't think either one of them are interested in turning themselves over to the United States. The last thing I would say is in this era where, on the one hand, President Trump and others talk daily about the deficit and about making cuts, the idea of spending the taxpayer dollars to do these things is somewhat unfathomable. Putting boots on the ground in Gaza to take it over or using our military might for any of these purposes is an expensive and ludicrous proposition. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Again, as a reminder, if you would like to join the Congresswoman's e-newsletter, you can press *6 at any time during this call, and an operator will take your information. We'll move to our next caller. Our next caller is Jennifer, who comes in from Raymond. Jennifer, you're live with the Congresswoman. Please go ahead with your question.
have about 15 questions since everything that I've heard, but I can refer those to emails. My first, the one that I called in about was with Trump in office and the administration. So when Obama implemented Obamacare, right, the ACA, they had the plan to implement like a complete across the United States kind of plan that correlated with Canada's. That did not go through, so then they went back and then they developed the marketplace, which again failed due to some IT issues, and then they fixed that and everything went fine. So out of 17 insurance companies or pairs that were developed or opened up since Obamacare came live in the United States, there are only 2 remaining, and those 2 are at extreme vulnerability based off of Trump's administration. Is there anything being done to keep those alive and to also keep the millions of people that they hold under coverage alive?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I'm sorry I can't take all 16 right now, but I understand there are a lot of questions out there. As to the Affordable Care Act, you make some really good points. I was here when we voted on that, and I was a strong supporter of the public option. That would have given us not really Canadian health care, but yet one more public opportunity when you didn't want to go with one of the insurance companies, or as you mentioned now, when we have less insurance companies in the marketplace. I'm very worried about the Affordable Care Act. You may remember that during the last Trump administration, we had 50 or 60 votes because they were intent on getting rid of it. He might have said during the campaign that he had some concepts and plans of a beautiful, beautiful way to replace it. Of course, we've heard nothing about that, and it is very, very complicated to replace a health care plan. My guess is that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle don't really want to eliminate the Affordable Care Act. It's functioning. It could use a lot more insurance companies and competition in the marketplace. But I am worried about the enhanced premium tax credits, which will expire this year. That makes it possible for many people in the state of Maine to be able to afford their premiums every month, and it is a critical part of how we keep the system going. As you know, Donald Trump is planning an extension of a lot of tax credits and wants to add many more, which of course will add greatly to the deficit. But I do hope when we have a serious tax negotiation later this year, this is one of the things we can stand our ground on and say this has to be included because we have to keep subsidizing those people who really need health care. And the same goes for Medicaid and expanded Medicaid that is a big part of funding health care, particularly in a state like Maine. So thanks for your question. It's certainly an area of great concern.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We again invite you all to join the Congresswoman's e-newsletter. You can do that by pressing *6 at any time during the call. If you'd like to get in the queue to ask a question live, you can do that by pressing *3 or asking your question underneath the streaming player. We'll move on to our next caller. We'll be bringing on Andrea from Portland. Again, we'll be bringing on Andrea from Portland. Looks like we've lost Andrea for now. We'll work on getting her back. We have a written anonymous question. Congresswoman, this question is, why won't you let DOGE do their job? The people voted for this.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. DOGE is actually continuing in spite of some of our concerns about it or our attempt to stop some of the work that they were doing. The people voted for Donald Trump, absolutely. But our job as elected officials is to make sure that we follow the Constitution and that the president follows the Constitution. So having an unelected billionaire proactively go ahead and lay off employees, stop the operation of whole agencies, stop funding streams, I don't believe that's allowed under the Constitution. So while we anticipated DOGE, as you know, that was much talked about during the campaign. Elon Musk had said he would find $2 trillion in cuts. Frankly, I looked forward to seeing a list of what $2 trillion in cuts they were proposing. I look forward to an audit of every agency of government and having the Appropriations Committee and the elected officials in Congress taking votes or negotiating on which one of those cuts to move forward on and how to do it in a sensible way, not in a way that blocks contracts that have already been signed, has whole agencies in states or nonprofit organizations struggling to make payroll or make payments. Many of you recall the first week that the payments were stopped, Meals on Wheels and Head Starts, agencies of governments couldn't fund anymore. Even the Medicaid program couldn't go through. And many of those cuts continue to this day. So I think they're greatly overstepping their constitutional powers. I think the president is going along with that. DOGE has, as the president originally announced it could form some great functions. I think there's a real opportunity for someone who stands outside of government to look for those areas where there is fraud and abuse or contracts should be stopped or reevaluated. So I'm not trying to stop it as an entity. I'm trying to stop the lawless activities and the great disruption in hiring and firing, things like freezes on healthcare workers at the Indian Health Service, blocking ships from leaving ports even after they're loaded with vital food supplies, laying people off with no possible notice and stopping whole agencies of government from functioning because you don't like some of their programs. So we have a long list of things that we want to see done differently, but I don't think that means that there's no value to the function. And again, to sort of respond to the people voted for it. The people voted for Donald Trump, they voted for DOGE, but I don't think that they voted for their farmer down the road not to get reimbursed for a hoop house that they bought under a contract with the government, fully believing they'd be paid back, and now are trying to figure out how to make ends meet.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We'll move to a called-in question. Our next question comes from Julie, who calls from Buxton. Julie, you're live with the Congresswoman. Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you. In my role as a social work educator and in my own life, I'm running into a number of young trans people who have an absolute firm conviction that they will be abandoned, that they are powerless and with being less than 1% of the population, do not have significant force to be able to protect themselves. I hope they're wrong, and I'm wondering in the conversations that you have heard whether you feel that there's a real backbone here in the protection of trans young people or any trans people.
Thank you for your question, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing. The president has gone off after some of our most vulnerable citizens and going after trans people, marginalizing them, creating fear in young people is cruel and unthinkable. And we are looking for every possible way to fight back. There are lawsuits going on. As you know, the president had an executive order to prohibit trans people from serving in the military, many of whom have served their country well, and there are lawsuits in this area. I will look for every possible way I can to be supportive and helpful. We should be listening to the medical professionals on this, not to unelected political opportunists, not to elected people who are just looking for opportunities to make political gain. So I'm very sorry. And I think this is another way where we can all look for ways to be helpful to our neighbors and our friends to make sure we're giving them support when they're feeling they're most vulnerable.
Thank you, Congresswoman. As another reminder, if you'd like to stay connected, you can feel free to press *6 at any time to join the Congresswoman's e-newsletter. We'll move to our next caller now. Next, we have Robert from Yarmouth. Robert, you are live with the Congresswoman. Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you so much. And Shelley Pingree, thank you so much for your leadership on this. This is a very heartwarming conversation to hear, a little glimmer of hope in this bleak world. I'm going to speak for myself and a lot of my friends and colleagues. We're struggling with how to make our voices heard most effectively. And I just want to get granular. Are there certain language that we should be using when we contact, I guess you, but more importantly, representatives on the Republican side that would be helpful to move the needle? And also, is it best to communicate by email, by calls, by letter? Like, how can I get my voice heard most efficiently? And should I be contacting representatives outside the state of Maine as well? Thank you.
Thanks so much for your question. I would say the most common question I hear from people is, what are you doing about this? And then the second most common is, what can I do about this? Because I know people desperately want to act, and I so deeply appreciate that. I appreciate citizens who want to be engaged and who understand the importance of using their voice. I think a lot of people after the election said to themselves, oh, this wasn't the outcome I was hoping for or I expected. I'm going to take a break, not listen to the news, and just focus on, my family or my crafts or my backyard or my job, whatever it was. And I so much appreciate that people have needed that, health and healing time. But I also know that people, as they're seeing the actions of this particular administration, are saying to themselves, I've got to do more. And I do appreciate people standing up and saying, I'm going to do more. I think paying attention to what's going on every day and listening to credible sources to make sure you understand the activities that are going on and how they are violating the Constitution or the things that you believe in, that's important to do. Every time you comment to me, to any of our elected officials in the state, you're performing a valuable service, and we all need to hear from you. Whether it's a letter, a phone call, an email, it matters. We keep track of them. That's true of all the offices in our state. I know that's true. And so never discount just taking that extra minute to make a call or send the email. When you have a chance and you can share a personal story, how this is impacting you directly, or perhaps you have a child that's being impacted, or the farmer down the road, or organization you work with, or you've just heard the funding's cut for a school that you care about, or an arts organization, responding to that and letting them know this is happening to me in my town, this is impacting my business, that makes a big difference. Out of state is sometimes trickier. Not all offices out of state take calls from people who don't live there, but everybody's got a cousin or a best friend or somebody, and if you want to alert them to something that you hear going on, as I mentioned, there's a freeze on hiring at our national parks. Well, if one of your friends lives in a town that has a national park, call them up and say, hey, this is going to impact your community's economy. All farmers around the country are impacted by these hiring freezes, and it will go on and on. Arts organizations are being impacted by freezes at the NEA and NEH. They're usually operating on a shoestring that will continue to go on. So any way you can possibly do that. I know many organizations are reconstituting themselves. Maybe they weren't as active during the Biden administration, but they're getting up and going again, and they're looking for ways to protest, to make their voices heard, to show up at gatherings. All of those things are very beneficial at this moment in time. I'm sorry to say it's an all hands on deck, and it's an all possible opportunities. Just keep doing it. The other thing is we all have a good friend who maybe voted for somebody else or maybe still thinks this is, what's going on is great. And, it's good to have a chance to talk to your friends once in a while and to just say, hey, I know you and I don't agree on everything, but do you really think it's a good idea that they're shutting down this funding stream? Or do you really think it's a good idea to have a billionaire making these decisions and not having any government oversight, no more inspector generals or firing people at the Justice Department who used to see these things? talk about what the Constitution does and the basis of it. Everything that you do will be valuable and much appreciated. And just to take that one step further, as I mentioned, some of the most vulnerable people are being impacted right away. Maybe you work with somebody in your office who's an asylum seeker waiting for their case to be heard, but they're feeling frightened or they're afraid to go out and they're afraid to send their children to school. We have a site on our website about Know Your Rights. Maybe you print it out and bring it to them and just remind them that they have rights. Maybe you have a friend with a trans child and you can just put an arm around their shoulder and say, how can I help? An arts organization that's lost their funding, or a farmer where you can make an extra purchase, or an organization that might be hurting and you can just help out. Unfortunately, we're only in the first few weeks of this, and some of these cuts will continue. The president has plans for, massive budget cuts. And all this money is to be used to continue the tax cuts for the wealthiest people in this country and to continue to give big corporations low tax rates. So we're going to have to fight quite a few times down the road, and there will be areas of time or opportunities during time when Congress can block some of these votes, and it'll be all hands on deck to let everybody know how you're feeling about their voting, or all hands on deck to just make sure you're informed of what's going on. But I greatly appreciate the conversation. We're going to do our best in our office to stay in touch as often and as frequently as we can to let you know what's happening as these days go on. And we're always happy to have your calls and to have your questions anytime you need more information.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Our next caller is Lyle from Sebago. Lyle, you're live with the Congresswoman. Please go ahead with your question.
Hi, Congresswoman. I just wanted to say first, thank you so much for doing this, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate you that you're fighting. My wife is a federal employee, and she left a career sometime last year because she really wanted to serve her community and help people. And she was a probationary employee. And part of the hard thing about all of this is, people are on edge anyway. But for example, you get this letter saying, resign, we'll give you this money. And then people will say, oh, this isn't legal, this isn't going to go through, so people don't do it. And if you sign this letter, you won't be able to get unemployment. And then this past Friday, she got a letter, all probationary employees, at least in her department, were told that they were going to be fired for cause in 2 weeks. And then Monday came around and they got another letter and said that letter was sent by mistake. And then today at 5:30, she got a letter saying she was fired effective immediately. And this, this really hurts families and hurts people. You lose your job, you lose your benefits, and a lot of people don't have backup. And it's really sad. And I guess my question is, people aren't talking about these people who are like in their first year of work and still probationary. Like there's no fight for them. Even the union kind of is throwing up their hands. They're like, we don't know what we can do for you. So what can be done for those people? And at least can you maybe help get the message out and say out loud that this is happening to people? And I would say, do you feel like these agencies just being decimated the way they are, that the pace in which the courts are moving, like, is it going to be a moot point after all of this? Because all these people are going to be gone and all this information is being deleted. I mean, I don't know what Musk and his team are doing in the shadows, and I don't think anyone does, and that's pretty scary. So I guess those are my two questions, and I just want to say thank you again. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your call. Thank your wife for making that choice to become a federal employee. As you said, many people leave jobs in the private sector where they might be making more, where they might have less responsibility or demands on their work, and doing important work that impacts all of us. So thank her very much for making that choice and for doing it. And thank you also for giving a personal face to what I think often is is sort of lost in this over-politicized world, in this world of rhetoric. People like Elon Musk and the president are often demonizing federal employees. They call them unelected bureaucrats. They call them corrupt. They call them all kinds of other things. But these are hardworking people who do the vital jobs that we need done every day. and you put a personal face on it. People don't often have lots of savings. They're often living paycheck to paycheck, or even if they're not, they're suddenly out of work and their world is turned completely upside down. Under this particular administration, they're just thrown out instantly. Sometimes they're escorted out of the office without even a chance to say goodbye or collect many of your belongings. It's just it's draconian. It's just hard to understand. In Maine, we know what it feels like to have a mill closure. And our hearts go out to those people in the communities, and we think about what a horrible, hard time they're going through. But these federal employees who are spread throughout Maine, throughout the country, we're not treating it in the same way. And we all need to check in with those people who are working for the federal government, who are getting mixed messages every day. As you said, this was 4 or 5 different messages that your wife got before it was a final firing. This is also a good example of, what a literal just shit show is going on. And I apologize, but, that's what we call it in Maine. It's just disorganized and chaotic. It's not professional. This is no way to run the government. This is no way to treat employees. There's no defense of it. It's just unthinkable. And it is so arbitrary, this idea that probationary employees can be fired. And this is happening in department after department. And I want you to know, it doesn't matter if you're a probationary firefighter fighting the California wildfires, you could be kicked out. Doesn't matter if you're a probationary healthcare worker. Anywhere. You could be performing a vital, vital service. And we're hearing stories about this all the time. The people who perform vital cleanup of Superfund sites at the EPA, one after another are being let go. And we need their work desperately. So this is not being done in a systematic way. It's chaotic. There's a court order that sends it back, and then there's just a change of heart based on what maybe some 19-year-old who has no authority to do this is just doing. So, I am so sorry about these stories. We're trying to do everything we possibly can. As you may know, the federal government, Donald Trump is trying to pass something called Schedule F so he can make everybody an arbitrary employee. So there is no longer any protection on your job, which is just really unthinkable for people who put in time and do this. And you also mentioned the, fork in the road email that they got from Elon Musk saying, we'll give you 8 months' salary. But that was done without the authority of Congress. We could have a government shutdown on March 14th and no more money to spend on the buyouts that they've proposed. So they were just dangling something in front of people that was completely unfair. So we apologize for that. We're going to have to take the last question or a wrap up. I think we're going to have to wrap up. Do we have time for one more question? No. Okay. I guess I have to wrap up because we've run out of time on this call. But please, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'm sorry we couldn't take more of the hundreds of questions that we got. You'll have an opportunity to let us know your question. If you had a chance that we didn't get to yours, stay on the line and leave us a message. I or a member of my staff will do our best to get back to you if you leave a phone number or email address. If any of you ever need anything at all that I can assist you with, you can contact my office. We have district offices in Portland and Waterville. To reach our main office, you can call 207-774-5019. Or send me an email at rep.shelley.pingree@mail.house.gov. All that is on our website, of course. I hope you found this useful. We will certainly be trying to do more of these in the future to keep you informed of what we are doing. We'll keep you informed through our statements to the press and our social media. We want to hear from you if you have any suggestions or the questions or things that are impacting your family or your life. Please be sure to let us know. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. Take care.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And thank you all for participating tonight. We've done our best to answer as many questions as possible this evening. Again, if you were not able to address your question, please leave a voicemail after the event or send us an email at rep.shelley.pingree@mail.house.gov. Thanks again for joining us. Good night.